James Madison is the father of the Constitution and the architect of American democracy. He's the man whose 85 Federalist Papers are still quoted by Supreme Court justices today. His system of checks and balances has survived 250 years, 2 world wars, a civil war, and 46 different presidents. But there is a side to him the history books usually skip. This man was so physically fragile that at 24 years old, he collapsed in the middle of a military drill. He never weighed more than 100 pounds. His voice was so thin and quiet that delegates at the Constitutional Convention had to move their chairs closer just to hear the words that would change the world. He was convinced he would be dead before he turned 30. His own body was his worst enemy. 2 centuries later, medical historians and geneticists are trying to solve a mystery. How did a man with such a breaking point physique survive 8 years as president and live to be 85, outlasting every other founding father? Was there something in his DNA that turned physical weakness into an intellectual superpower? Were his mysterious seizures, which looked like epilepsy, the spark that made his brain work differently? Was his survival coded in his genes from the days of Jamestown, where his ancestors endured famine, war, and the death of thousands? To understand the secret carried in Madison's DNA, we have to go back 400 years to 1608. We have to stand on the deck of the ship John and Francis as it crosses the Atlantic in the dead of winter. On board is an 18-year-old named Captain Isaac Madison. He was the first of the line, carrying a survival code that would eventually show up in his fragile descendant who changed the face of America.
But first, if you can hit that like button in the next 3 seconds, it shows you love your mom. And if you subscribe to the channel, it means you love your entire family.
The office at the Montpelier estate was always filled with a specific, heavy dimness. It was a space where time seemed to stop. The air was thick with the scent of Virginia tobacco from his own plantations, mixed with the smell of burnt wax and the dust of thousands of old books. James Madison spent 16 hours a day here. His desk looked like a battlefield of ideas, piled high with texts in Latin, ancient Greek, and French. He didn't just read history, he dissected it. While his peers were arguing about taxes and borders, Madison was looking at the ruins of ancient Greece and the fall of the Roman Republic. He was searching for the answer to a biological question. How do you create a political organism that won't rot from the inside under the weight of human greed? His handwriting was tiny and perfectly neat, covering thousands of pages. Every letter was a brick in the foundation of a new nation. But behind this massive effort was a body that could barely handle the load.
James Madison went down in history as the most miniature president of the United States. He stood just 5'4" and rarely weighed more than 100 pounds. Next to his colleagues, the monumental 6'4" George Washington or the athletic Thomas Jefferson, Madison looked like a transparent ghost. In his daily life, his physical fragility was a constant worry for those around him. His wife, Dolly Madison, was his opposite. Full of energy and social grace, she developed a whole strategy to protect her husband's image. At official dinners, she always sat at the head of the table. She carved the meat and led the loud conversations, making sure guests didn't notice that James's portions were tiny, hardly enough to feed a child. His voice was so weak that during heated debates in Congress, people in the back rows had to stand up and huddle around him just to hear his arguments. But that was his magic. By forcing people to be silent and lean in, he made them focus on his logic rather than his volume.
After finishing Princeton, then called the College of New Jersey, in just 2 years instead of 4, Madison suffered a massive breakdown. At 24, during a mandatory militia drill, he suddenly fainted right in front of his father. Doctors at the time didn't know what to do with his symptoms. They called it epileptoid hysteria. He suffered from sudden tremors, bouts of deep gloom, and unexplainable weakness. He was certain he would die young. It was that very fear of a short life that drove him to work with such intensity, pouring every bit of his life force into his mind. Official history paints Madison as a bookish genius, but his DNA carried the memory of a living hell. Madison proudly carried the name of his great-great-great-grandfather, Captain Isaac Madison. Isaac's life was tied to the first permanent English settlement in the New World, Jamestown. When Isaac stepped onto that shore in 1608, he walked into a nightmare. The colony was dying. Only a few of the first settlers survived. The winter of 1609 became known as the starving time. People were driven to the absolute edge, eating dogs, cats, snakes, and even boiling the leather from their own shoes. The Madison genetic memory started with that desperate survival. Isaac didn't survive because he was the strongest warrior. He survived because of the same trait his famous descendant would have: adaptive intelligence. He became a map maker, studying the rivers of Virginia, and he learned to play a delicate diplomatic game with the Powhatan people. In 1622, when a massive uprising killed over 300 colonists, Isaac survived again. His path was that of a man who lives by analyzing his environment rather than using brute force. Madison's DNA belongs to a branch of haplogroup R1b, which is common among the early settlers from the British Isles. It carried a strategy of survival diplomacy, but there was also a dark chapter in his family history that became the future president's biggest political lesson. James's grandfather, Ambrose Madison, was a different kind of man. He believed in absolute power and strict control. In 1732, he decided to expand the family's land and moved his wife and children to a new area that would eventually become Montpelier. To clear the ancient forests, he used the labor of 29 slaves. Ambrose ruled with an iron fist and didn't believe in compromise. His reign was short. Just 6 months after the move, on a muggy August night, Ambrose died in agony. An official investigation in Virginia found a shocking truth. He had been poisoned by 3 of his slaves. It was the first recorded murder of a plantation owner by poisoning in the colony's history. This event left a permanent mark on the whole family. The future president's father, James Madison Sr., was only 9 at the time and grew up in the shadow of this horror. His mother, the widow Frances, ran the plantation for the next 30 years. She taught her son and grandson a simple truth: leadership based only on fear and force is doomed. Tyranny breeds poison, both literally and figuratively. This family trauma is exactly what drove James Madison's obsession with a system of checks and balances. He understood that if one group has absolute power over another, disaster is unavoidable. His political philosophy was a biological response to the murder of his grandfather.
His strategy was unique. He didn't get into shouting matches. He waited for the passion to cool, for the delegates from big and small states to hit a wall, and for Southerners and Northerners to threaten to break the Union. Then he would stand up, pale, small, and quiet, and start talking with the logic of math and history. He told them that men are not angels. Since human nature is selfish, the system had to be built so that ambition would be made to counteract ambition. He didn't just suggest laws, he proposed a state of constant balance. His Federalist Number 10 became a manifesto. A large republic is more stable than a small one because it has so many different groups and interests that no single one can ever take total control. Madison lived to be 85, outlasting almost all the founding fathers. How could a man who expected to die at 24 handle decades of extreme stress, a war with Britain, and 2 terms as president? The answer wasn't obvious. We usually think the strongest survive, the ones with the most muscle and the toughest hearts. But Madison's case makes us look at DNA differently. His frailty wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy by nature. All the energy his body didn't spend on building muscle or being aggressive was redirected to the neural networks in his prefrontal cortex. His brain was his primary survival tool, sharpened by generations of diplomat ancestors in Jamestown. His physical weakness acted as an evolutionary filter that cut away everything unnecessary, leaving only cold, sharp intelligence. Madison left behind thousands of pages of writing,
but he never wrote about the biggest secret of his life. Where did his fragile body get this incredible endurance? Why did a man who was supposed to die at 30 live to 85? Why did his brain work in a way that let him hold the entire structure of a government in his head, with all its thousands of details and connections? For years, we looked for the answer in medical files, but the solution was hidden in his DNA. It turns out the survival code his ancestors carried through the Jamestown famine, the Indian Wars, and the deadly malaria outbreaks showed up in him in a very unexpected way. His physical weakness wasn't a curse, it was a mutation that forced his brain to develop in a way that no one else's did. To truly understand the phenomenon of James Madison, modern medical historians had to become detectives at the molecular level. They started by looking at his personal letters, hundreds of notes to Thomas Jefferson and his wife, Dolly. These aren't just political papers, they are a detailed map of physical suffering. Madison described his bilious attacks, sudden blackouts, and chronic exhaustion with scientific detachment. Doctors in the 1700s and 1800s who only had leeches and mercury were lost. They gave him diagnoses that sound like a lack of imagination today: hypochondria, nervous disorder, or melancholy exhaustion. They thought his mind was too big for his body and that his thoughts were literally burning his flesh. But modern science, looking at those same symptoms through genetics and immunology, sees something much more complex and frightening. Madison's symptoms, the sudden fainting he called seizure attacks, and the chronic inflammation, point toward a rare but destructive autoimmune condition. His own immune system, his biological guard, was set to a hair trigger. His body was attacking itself, mistaking its foreign tissue for an enemy invader. And here we run into...
When a person's body is chronically limited and cannot spend energy on physical dominance, hunting, or war, the brain enters an emergency compensation mode. In Madison, this process reached its absolute peak. Think of his brain as a high-performance supercomputer installed in a fragile, rattling case. To survive in a world where physical strength was everything, his brain literally started remapping its own architecture. Every resource his body had, the few calories his weak stomach could actually digest, was sent straight to the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, logical modeling, and managing complex, multi-layered systems. His records from the 1787 Constitutional Convention aren't just notes, they are a neurobiological miracle. Madison had what we would today call extreme working memory. He sat in the front row, and while other delegates lost their tempers, shouted, or gave up because of the stifling heat, his brain worked like a perfect recording device. He remembered every word of every speech, every tone of voice, and every hidden interest of his opponents. He could calculate in real time how a single change in a law would play out 50 years into the future. This wasn't just a talent he picked up at Princeton. It was the result of a biological hard coding. His prefrontal cortex was so developed that he saw the political system not as a list of rules, but as a living machine where every gear was a human weakness that needed to be balanced. His intellect became his only survival tool, his claws and fangs in a world of political predators. But where did this abnormal ability to survive against biological decay come from? To find the answer, we have to travel back to 1608, to the salty marshes of Virginia and Fort Jamestown. His ancestor, Captain Isaac Madison, belonged to the R1b-L21 haplogroup, a line that have survived for thousands of years on the harsh edges of Europe. But Jamestown was the most brutal test yet. The period known as the Starving Time, 1609 to 1610, was a literal evolutionary filter. Out of 500 settlers, barely 60 survived. Excavations in Jamestown in 2012 and 2013 revealed a terrifying truth. They found the remains of a 14-year-old girl named Jane. Her bones showed knife marks, proving that after she died, her fellow settlers turned to cannibalism. In this hell, where people lost their humanity to hunger, Madison's ancestor, Isaac,
He didn't survive by stealing food from the weak. Records describe Isaac as a man of extraordinary mind and tact, while other colonists tried to take grain from the Indians by force, causing bloody fights. Isaac Madison studied their language and customs. He became a mapmaker and a diplomat. He realized that a copper kettle given to the right chief at the right time would bring more corn than 10 muskets. This genetic code, survival through intellect and understanding the system, was passed down. His son, John, became a shipwright, building complex vessels that required precision and vision. His grandson, Ambrose, tried to break this code, choosing to rule his plantation through brute force and fear. The result was fatal. He was poisoned by his own slaves. It was a biological reminder to the Madison line. In their family, raw power was a dead end that led to death. When James Madison was born in 1751, he inherited 200 years of concentrated experience. His DNA held the memory of the Jamestown famine, the slaves' poison, and the diplomacy of the pioneers. His body was fragile because evolution had bet everything on his mind. It was as if his biology was telling him, you can't fight and you can't.
The windows of the State House were nailed shut so no one could eavesdrop on the secret debates. Inside, 55 men with conflicting interests were on the edge of civil war. Delegates from big states like Virginia demanded power based on their population. Small states like Delaware threatened to align with foreign powers if their right to an equal vote was taken away. In the middle of this chaos sat Madison. He weighed less than anyone there and looked the most vulnerable, but he had the most powerful operating system in the room. When he finally spoke, he didn't talk about honor or patriotism. He talked about mechanics. If men were angels, he said in his quiet, shaky voice, no government would be necessary. This was the core of his biological experience. He knew that humans are weak, greedy, and ambitious. Instead of trying to fix human nature, he decided to use those flaws to fuel the system. He designed the system of checks and balances. It was a political version of his own body. The legislative branch was split into two houses so they would constantly argue. The president had the veto, but Congress could override it. The courts protected the Constitution, but the president appointed the judges. Madison built a government that works not because politicians are good people, but because their personal ambitions force them to watch over each other. He created a system where no single person can become a tyrant because their weakness is balanced by the strength of the system. It was the ultimate triumph of the mind over physical force. But the real power of America wasn't forged in a cavalry charge. It happened at the tip of a pen, held by a man who weighed less than a soldier's field gear. James Madison's three major achievements aren't just points in a history book. They were biological acts of survival for a nation, dictated by his own unique DNA. Picture 1787. The young republic is falling apart. States are fighting trade wars, paper money is worthless, and anarchy is right around the corner. 55 delegates gather in Philadelphia, the best of the American elite. But while others are arguing about borders and taxes, Madison is busy building the operating system. This man, barely hitting 100 pounds, had a mental stamina that actually scared people. To convince the nation to accept the new Constitution, he teamed up with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. Madison wrote 29 of the 85 texts. These weren't just articles, they were the blueprints for controlling human nature. Madison wrote these essays while fighting fevers and insomnia. His fingers would cramp up, but he couldn't stop. He knew that if this system didn't pass now, the 13 colonies would tear each other apart. In the famous Federalist No. 10, he came up with a theory that changed everything. He talked about the tyranny of the majority. Since he had been a physical minority his whole life, the smallest, quietest, most fragile guy in the room, he felt the danger of the crowd on a biological level. He knew that if a majority gets absolute power, it will eventually crush the weak. His fix was the system of checks. Fragmentation of power. He broke power into thousands of small pieces. Balance of factions. He set up a system where the interests of Virginia farmers would clash with Massachusetts merchants.
dynamic equilibrium. In his world, nobody wins for good. It's a constant moving. Madison took his personal experience of surviving in a breaking point body and applied it to the whole country. He proved that a system's stability doesn't come from a strong leader, but how well its weaknesses are spread out. It's hard to believe, but the father of the Constitution was originally against the Bill of Rights. His mathematical mind, but that's where his main trait, adaptability, came in. When he saw that the states wouldn't sign off on the Constitution without guarantees of personal freedom, he made a huge pivot. He didn't just agree to the Bill of Rights, he took charge of writing it himself. He went through hundreds of suggestions from different states, cutting the radical stuff and keeping the essentials. That's how the first 10 amendments were born. Freedom of speech and religion, so nobody can force a man to be quiet. Protection from illegal searches, so a home stays a fortress. Right to a fair trial, so the law is stronger than a personal grudge. Why did he, the skeptic, create the most perfect system for protecting rights in history? Because the weakest man in the room is the one who understands the value of safety best. Madison knew that freedom starts where the law protects the most vulnerable person from the government. His Bill of Rights is the immune system of democracy, built to protect the body from the infection of tyranny. In 1812, as the fourth president, Madison faced a test that should have destroyed him. Great Britain, with the most powerful navy on earth and an army fresh from fighting Napoleon, declared war on its former colony. It was a mess. In August 1814, British troops landed in Maryland and marched on Washington. Panic hit the city. Madison, wearing a black suit that looked way too big for his skinny frame, was on horseback trying to organize the defense. But it wasn't enough. The British entered Washington and torched the White House, the Capitol, and the Library of Congress. The president had to run, watching from the hills of Virginia as the glow of the fire ate the Capitol he helped build. It looked like the American experiment was over. The little guy had lost to the great empire, but that's when the Madison Code kicked in. Britain could burn the buildings, but they couldn't burn the ideas in the Constitution. Madison didn't become a military dictator. He didn't suspend the laws or start rounding up protesters. He kept leading the country as a civilian, relying on the system he created. The British choked on their own aggression. American grit at Fort McHenry, Andrew Jackson's win at New Orleans, and the Treaty of Ghent in 1815 put things back in place. America didn't just survive, it realized it was a single nation. His wife, Dolly Madison, played her own part in protecting the nation's symbols during this time. The most physically weak president in history proved that an idea protected by law is stronger than the stones of the Capitol. Empires fall and fleets sink, but the code of liberty written into the nation's DNA remains. Madison left us a system that's worked for over 200 years. But before we finish, there's one last question. There are family records saying that in his final years, James was working on a secret legacy for the nation that he never dared to publish. His story isn't just a biography of the fourth president, it's biological proof that evolution doesn't always go for bigger teeth and muscles. Sometimes nature gambles on extreme fragility to force the mind to make a massive leap. We're used to the phrase survival of the fittest, but Madison makes us rethink what fit actually means. His path was set 150 years before he was born in the marshes of Jamestown. His ancestor, Captain Isaac Madison, carried the R1B. This system-thinking code was passed down like a relay baton through generations until it reached James Madison. But in James, that code hit a wall of extreme physical limitations. Modern neuroscience reveals a fascinating phenomenon: neuroplasticity through chronic stress. When a child grows up in a body that constantly fails them, dealing with epileptoid seizures, sudden blackouts, and chronic weakness, the brain doesn't just adapt, it goes into a state of hypercompensation. Since young James couldn't participate in the physical games, hunting, or horse racing typical of the Virginia aristocracy, his body funneled all its energy into the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that is more developed in humans than in any other animal, the center of logic, long-term planning, and the suppression of basic animal impulses. In Madison, this area was running at full throttle. His frailty was the price his body paid for building a different kind of neural network, denser, more complex, and designed to hold massive amounts of information. By the time he walked into the Constitutional Convention at age 36, he didn't just know the theory. He carried 2 centuries of survival by intellect in his blood. He was the weakest man in the room, but that weakness made him the only person capable of writing the rules for an entire nation. The story of James Madison leaves us with 3 fundamental lessons that are more relevant today than ever, especially as AI and algorithms begin to play the same role Madison's laws once did. We tend to idolize athleticism. George Washington was a living monument, 6'2", legendary strength, a man who could supposedly bend horseshoes. Alexander Hamilton was the picture of a daring combat officer. Thomas Jefferson was an all-around athlete and architect, but none of these giants could create the thread that held the country together. Madison understood something the giants didn't. Flesh dies, but institutions are forever. Real power isn't about crushing resistance with force, it's about channeled resistance into something useful. He looked at politics like physics. You can't stop gravity, human greed, but you can build a structure that uses gravity to stand even firmer. He proved that software, the ideas on paper, is always more important than hardware, armies, and muscle. His power was invisible, built on a logic that left even the loudest speakers speechless. This is the most personal lesson. For Madison, being frail wasn't a curse. It was a strategic edge. Quote, "When you can't fight, you learn to negotiate. When you can't outshout a crowd, you learn to write so your words are read in the silence of an office." End quote. His notes from the Constitutional Convention are 200 pages of tiny handwriting that captured every breath of American democracy. While other delegates wasted their energy on grand speeches, Madison was busy absorbing information. He turned his physical stillness into a heightened mental sensitivity. He heard what was being said between the lines. He saw the hidden fears of the delegates and offered solutions that made those fears disappear. His mental strength was a direct result of his physical limitations. This was Madison's greatest achievement as an engineer of the human soul. His peers, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, hoped for virtuous citizens. They believed the republic would survive if people were good. Madison was the only pessimist whose lack of faith in human
Madison created the world's first political blockchain, a system where trust is replaced by a mathematical balance of interests. So, was he who he claimed to be? Yes, he was a great American, but his greatness was born from weakness, not strength. His DNA carried the survival code of those first Jamestown colonists, people who endured famine, war, and impossible odds, surviving through wit and diplomacy rather than muscle. His body was fragile, but his brain compensated with genius. Madison and Lincoln even share a rare genetic signature that links them back to the same ancient European roots, showing that this survival code is woven deep into the American story. Most importantly, he knew that any power system built on one strong man is doomed. That's why he built a world where no one is strong enough to destroy it, where ambition fights ambition, where the weakness of one branch is balanced by the strength of another. Greatness isn't about muscle. It's born from struggle, from tragedy, and from the ability to turn a weakness into a weapon. Evolution doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for adaptation. The most successful people aren't the ones without flaws. They're the ones who turned their flaws into a superpower. Madison's story proves it. Evolution doesn't work through perfection. It works through adaptation. The most successful people aren't those who have no weaknesses. They're the ones who learned how to turn those weaknesses into a superpower. So, what is your biological code hiding?
Have you ever wondered which weaknesses you're compensating for with your strengths? And have you ever taken a DNA test? If you want the truth about your roots, subscribe to the channel.
In the next episode, we'll dive into the story of the most photographed woman of the 20th century, whose life inside the royal family was a total genetic trap.